The United Methodist Church obviously made a series of decisions at the last General Conference that alienated a lot of people. Many had already left. Some are being allowed to leave right now, although the annual conferences allowing churches to leave are usually keeping things pretty hush-hush. We've heard some numbers recently that are kind of astounding. Many annual conferences have just refused to let churches leave. And so we're watching all that happening. But I did a segment just the other day looking at attendance figures, and things look really bad for the United Methodist Church. And I'm not surprised, and I'm not rejoicing in it. This is not gloating or anything. This is trying to figure out what's going on. And so as I looked at these attendance figures from 2019 to 2022, the in-person attendance in the United Methodist Church dropped 40%. And that was before the bulk of disaffiliations. Now, it is possible that in 2022, the biggest churches left and that the 2023 drop is not as big as it looks. I'm suspecting that at least 65% of the worshiping body collectively from 2019 is now gone. But giving also has to do with it, and I didn't track the giving stats comparatively because I don't think that they track particularly useful stuff. But News just published an article here by Heather Hahn, Amid Uncertainty, Finance Board Plans for a New Day. And it describes the most recent GCFA. Well, I don't think it's GCFA. It's here, I'll just read it to you. And it has some really interesting stuff. You have to go through a couple things with me first. And then we're not going to read the whole article. It is a good article. Heather Hahn did a great job. But we'll read over a good deal of it. The new board of the UMC's finance agency began its work of shepherding denominational funds over the next 4 years while still facing concerns about what funding will look like. The General Council on Finance and Administration Board, okay, it is the GCFA board. It held its organizing meeting August 6th through 9th in the Nashville suburb of Franklin, Tennessee. The gathering was the board's first since its members were elected at the historic General Conference that also ended long-time denomination-wide bans on gay clergy and same-sex marriage. So you might connect these themes. This and the later stuff we're going to talk about. The same General Conference also approved a historically low denomination-wide budget and reduced a number of U.S. bishops after the departure of about a quarter of U.S. churches between 2019 and 2023. So the reporting that I've done is that actually when you look at disaffiliations and the discontinuation of churches, I'm pretty sure the UMC has lost a third of their churches since 2019. So a third of their churches, more than half of their attendees. That's the picture with number of churches and attendees. Membership has been strangely higher than you would expect. So anyway, there are these two measures. We're going to look at the finance piece. The new denominational budget, which starts on January 1st, has a bottom line between $353 and $373 million for funding ministry over the next 4 years. That's about a 40% decrease from the previous GCFA General Conference approved when it met in 2016. And that sounds like a big deal, but it was already a super bloated budget. And they knew that the shortfall would be greater than 40%. So this was actually not up to the task at all. And I published about that during General Conference on the Plain Spoken Substack. The GCFA board has the responsibility of ensuring that the budgeted funds are used as the conference approved. The board also must deal with the financial fallout of General Conference decisions as well as church disaffiliations. Congregations in the U.S. support the bulk of the denominational funding, and much remains unknown about what their giving capacity will be in the coming years. United Methodists are living through a period of change, the Reverend Stephen Handy said during the group's opening worship. Quote, "In this season, we are part of Generation T, the generation of transition," preached Handy. I just thought that was so corny. Like, every generation is a generation of transition. Like, that's all we've ever known is like constant change. So he says, "Let's be real. We followed this Palestinian Jewish rabbi. If you follow him, you're always in transition." So yeah, it's a faithful thing that your denomination is declining and losing all of its assets. I think that's the inference there. Also, it just drives me nuts when people call him a Palestinian. That is just, that's not a thing. I know that they call the region Palestine, but it is called that by the Romans because they were so angry at the Jews that they named it after their enemies that were never dominant in the region, the Philistines. Palestine, Philistine, that's where it comes from. So to call it Palestine or Palestinian, it's politically charged. To lead during this time of flux, the board elected its new officers. Bishop David Graves, you might remember him. I covered him a lot in Alabama, West Florida, and now he's bishop of several other places as well. Yeah, that's what it talks about here. He's starting September 1st to lead Kentucky, Tennessee, Western Kentucky, and Central Appalachian missionary conferences. And they also put Moses Kumar back up. Let's see. Let's skip down a little bit. Okay, so here's the update on giving. This is where it starts getting pretty interesting. Kumar also sounded a note of caution. Apportionment collections were down as of the end of July compared to the same time last year. Not many people are surprised by that. To fund denominational ministries, the finance agency collects apportionments. Those are shares of giving from annual conferences. These regional bodies in turn ask for apportionments from the local churches within their borders. As of the end of July, the apportionment collection rate from the U.S. conferences was 31.4% compared to a little higher in 2023. The collection rate from churches in Africa, Philippines, Europe was 20.5%, which is just a little bit lower. 5 Episcopal areas outside of the U.S. have not paid any apportionments. So I got sent this article and I looked at that and I was like, well, these percentages aren't a big deal, I don't think. But it goes on. Those receipts include $3.7 million from 5 U.S. Conferences collected as part of church disaffiliations. Departing churches were required to pay their conferences at least 2 years of apportionments as part of their agreement to leave with the property. My churches paid that. The finance agency also received apportionments from disaffiliating churches last year, but not every conference informed the agency what part of their giving came from the churches that have now left. Isn't that interesting that annual conferences are not reporting on some of these finances to the general church? Maybe I'm uncharitable, but I'm thinking the only reason not to report that stuff is if you want to hold on to that money for yourself rather than sending it up. Maybe there's another reason why. I don't know. I really don't know. Altogether, the article continues, collections through July are $6.1 million less than in 2023. That's kind of small potatoes compared to the overall budget. It's not anything to be worried about, but the next sentence is interesting. More than $5 million of that shortfall has occurred in the previous 2 months. So we are 8.5 months into the year, but just the last 2 months, all of a sudden people are not giving nearly as much. Or what is that? What's going on? The denomination is still operating under the higher apportionment requests that General Conference passed in 2016 as part of the denominational budget. Since 2020, a number of conferences have been paying lower apportionments based on lower budget initially proposed to the General Conference, which they delayed to 2024. However, the trend in collections, especially in June and July, is worse than during the previous 3 years, and GCFA staff do not know why. Gee, what could it be? Could it be that there was a general conference that made a really bad set of decisions and took a side in the culture war that was not wise? However, the trend, August is going to be a pivotal month for us, and we'll be watching that closely to see where we land, said Sheila Ayler, Reverend, chair of the board's General Agency and Episcopal Matters Committee that deals with budgetary matters. Ayler became it gets kind of in the weeds here, and it starts talking about how it looks like they're going to have to decrease the Episcopal fund and not be able to fund some of these bishops. Now, it's worth remembering, they're not going to be closing up shop as a denomination anytime soon. They have enough undesignated reserves to keep the denomination afloat, even if people stop giving entirely, which is not going to happen. There's always going to be people in churches that give. It's not going to be enough to keep everything afloat. So for a long time, they're going to live off reserves. They're going to liquidate the assets of closed churches. They can stay alive for a long time. So this is This is not me saying the UMC is going to close up shop anytime soon. What I wanted to highlight was that giving seems to track pretty clearly with a general conference that went poorly. They had much more confidence that they'd be able to. I remember the deliberations on the floor of general conference and how many were really upset about decreasing the budget that much, and budget cuts in different agencies, and saying, oh, well, if we take up a certain number of collections, a certain percentage of collections, then we can increase the budget again. That was all pie in the sky. Like, at this point, so many people who've been giving to the UMC so long see the writing on the wall. And it isn't just that they see it's not viable, it's that they see that these funds go to things that hate them and stand against them. So there are a lot of churches that are trapped that are just not going to pay apportionments now. There are a lot of people who are committed to a local church that are just going to refuse to give to it as long as they're giving apportionments. And so this is what pastors and church leadership have to consider is, do we want to be able to keep the doors open? Do we want to be able to pay the pastor? Okay, well, then we're going to have to stop giving to the UMC. Even if the Book of Discipline says that's your first financial obligation, the trust has been broken and people on the ground floor are not being represented at the top. I've talked a lot about that, so I've got a good body of work to look back on there. But it's a continual question as these different signs crop up that the United Methodist Church has made a bad decision and that they have not stewarded the authority and resources given them well. Will there be a time of repentance and owning up to what's happened? And I'm pretty confident that's just not coming. We should continue to pray for that, not out of a sense of vindication, but it's just wrong to gaslight people forever and then just go down with the ship. I still think we should pray that the UMC enters a time of repentance and renewing its covenant with God as known through the scriptures, not through the modern zeitgeist conscience. And I think that's a loving prayer to say.